Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Supporting Our Military and Veteran Caregivers, sponsored by SAMHSA's Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center. My name is Alexandra Mead, and I will serve as your moderator for this afternoon. I'm a project manager with the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to some important webinar logistics. There are two audio options for today's webinar, phone or computer audio. If you're using your telephone, please make sure to enter your audio PIN number into your phone. And you may send us questions at any time during today's webinar by submitting them through the Q&A option located in the navigation bar. Towards the end of our presentation today, we will answer as many of your questions as time allows. A note that this webinar is being recorded, and a recorded version of the entire webinar, as well as a PDF of the presentation slides, will be available on the webinar archives page of the National Council's website within 48 hours of today's broadcast. And following today's webinar, we invite you to please complete a short survey, which will automatically open in a new browser window following the session. And now, if you're ready, Stacy, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Stacy Owens, Military and Veterans Affairs Liaison for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on supporting our military and veteran caregivers. November is an important month in our nation because Veterans Day provides a special occasion for us to pay our respects to those who've served. In addition to Veterans Day, President Biden recently signed a proclamation designating November 2021 as National Veterans and Military Families Month. This is a great reminder that families as a whole bear the impact of service. In addition to that, it's also National Family Caregivers Month, and November just really gives us a perfect opportunity to raise awareness of caregiving issues and discuss ways to increase support for military and veteran caregivers. Next slide, please. I'll read this disclaimer. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of SAMHSA or HHS. Next slide, please. This webinar is being sponsored by SAMHSA's Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center, which partners with states and territories to increase behavioral health support for the SMVF community. SAMHSA is the agency within the Department of Health and Human Services that leads efforts to ensure that mental health and substance use treatment needs of all Americans are understood, including the needs of the SMVF community. Next slide, please. SAMHSA's SMVF TA Center offers various TA, including strengthening ongoing collaboration among military and civilian stakeholders, providing centralized mechanisms for cities, states, and territories to learn, connect, and share, increasing awareness of and access to resources and programs that strengthen behavioral health systems for SMVF, supporting coordinated responses to the behavioral health needs of SMVF, and encouraging cities, states, and territories to implement promising, best, and evidence-based practices. Next slide, please. The Technical Assistance Center also provides training and technical assistance through various activities, including academies, crisis intercept mapping, webinars, learning communities, TA call series, on-site and virtual expert consultation, as well as resource dissemination. Next slide, please. And here we have our learning objectives for you today, which include the following. Describe the military and veteran family experience and share insights on their behavioral health needs. Illustrate how military and veteran family life may be impacted by trauma and secondary or vicarious trauma. Demonstrate concrete strategies for supporting caregivers and preventing burnout. Connect with caregivers through hearing their story, and also provide examples of peer-based support and services to connect the caregivers of SMVF with access points to behavioral health resources. Next slide, please. We have 3 dynamic presenters that we're excited to bring before you as we discuss this important topic. First, you will hear from Melissa Como, Director of the American Red Cross Military and Veteran Caregiver Network. In addition to her position, Ms. Como is also the spouse and caregiver of a U.S. Marine who was wounded in combat. Her book, entitled Sleeping with the War, brought the family and caregiver perspective to life after combat. She has a long history of providing peer support to military families. She served as a fellow for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and was also appointed to the Department of Veterans Affairs Federal Advisory Committee for veterans, family, caregivers, and survivors. Next, you'll hear from Sean Moore, Executive Director and founder of Caregivers on the Home Front. Since May of 2013, Sean has been a caregiver for her husband, who's a 23-year Army veteran. She's a peer mentor with the Red Cross Military and Veteran Caregiver Network, as well as a peer mentor with the Department of Veterans Affairs Caregiver Program. She built upon her passion for supporting the caregiver community and recently earned her Master of Social Work degree. She's a licensed social worker in the state of Missouri. And last, but certainly not least, you'll hear from Katie Leroy, who's a caregiver Katie Leroy, who is a caregiver for her spouse, U.S. Army veteran Stephen Leroy, who sustained injuries while deployed in Afghanistan, which resulted in immediate bilateral leg amputation. Ms. Leroy not only helps care for her husband, but she has also found ways to help other veterans and first responders. She previously worked at Walter Reed as an adaptive scuba instructor, where she helped wounded and injured veterans achieve independence in the water. Each of these presenters has a unique and impactful personal story, as well as a wealth of resources. We appreciate them for sharing with us today, and we appreciate you all for being here to learn more about this important topic. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Melissa Como, Director of Military and Veteran Caregiver Network for American Red Cross.
Hello, thank you so much for that kind introduction. My name is Melissa Como, and I am the Director of the Military and Veteran Caregiver Network. But probably more importantly, I'm also a caregiver to my husband, a combat wounded Marine. So I'm going to start with a few comments, and then I'm going to move into my presentation. Sleeping with the war. Slow fear as the goblin tears the sheets. I wake up silent and cold. Shocking whispers of the dead, steel cold, wide open eyes, screaming what they have seen. Sinking deep into the bed, he crawls over me with his heavy soul, breath hot and filled with the terrible, hands upon my shoulders like railway spikes. Our faces close. My heart dies with these memories that aren't mine. Swollen pain and terror has to escape. Captured by this man, kidnapped by this war, my screams can't fly, laying here in my still blood. I wrote this collection of poetry in response to some of the darkest times in my life. I wrote them like a secret I was never going to tell because honestly, I thought I was the only one. Years later, I'm in a place to share them in the hopes of helping other caregivers. I have been hopeful and I have been honest, and that alone has helped me find the support that I needed. My husband, Staff Sergeant Stephen Como, served proudly in the United States Marine Corps for nearly 13 years. Stephen completed a total of 4 combat deployments in support of both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. He was awarded a Purple Heart for injuries he sustained in a rocket-propelled grenade explosion. But Stephen doesn't just have one injury, but rather many that require care on multiple fronts. The war has taken a toll on his body. His physical injuries are significant, and one of his doctors told us he had the body of a 65-year-old man. At the time, my husband was only 37. His invisible injuries, a traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, are a completely different struggle. It has been hard to manage his recovery, and at times I have been completely alone in this endeavor. I move forward focusing on the love and respect I have for my husband. Stephen is in every way my hero. Even with all of the challenges we have shared, I still feel incredibly lucky to have him, and we are determined to make the best life we can for our family. I became a caregiver without even realizing it. The first time a nurse ever identified me as my husband's caregiver, my response was, no, my husband's young. Because in my mind, a caregiver took care of the elderly, not a wife taking care of her husband after war. I then proceeded to tell this nurse I was just his wife, and she very kindly said, "You are probably both." I was unprepared for the challenges my entire family was experiencing. For 2 years, my whole life's focus was my husband's recovery. This situation took a lot out of me. I was depressed. I was tired all the time. I had high blood pressure. I gained weight because I found out I'm what's called a stress eater. And boy, did I eat. I felt like no one in the world understood what I was going through, and I was a little bit lost. Identifying as a caregiver was one of the first steps to finding the support I so desperately needed. Once I learned there was a name for the work I was doing, I was better equipped to search for resources and, most importantly, peers. I am forever grateful to the nurse that called me a caregiver, because without her, I'm not sure how long I would have gone without support. I'm a caregiver taking care of someone for the most part looks just fine. My husband's medical conditions are not always obvious, and his pride prevents him from ever wanting to seem vulnerable. It's an honor to be the one person who knows him so completely. I've attended hundreds of medical appointments with him, and I'm so grateful that the VA has always welcomed me to be a participant in his care plan. There are lots more efforts underway to help caregivers be included in the care of their veterans, such as the Elizabeth Dole Foundation's Campaign for Inclusive Care. And most notably, we've started 3 new programs. November Family Caregiver Month is always a big month for us all, but we have a Caregiver to Survivor effort underway in partnership with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and TAPS. We have a VA Caregiver Save training, which is a suicide prevention training for providers that might also be serving caregivers. And just last week, Hidden Helpers was launched at the White House as an initiative to support caregivers who are in, or children in caregiving homes who might also be picking up some of the caregiving responsibilities. I'm going to switch to my presentation because all of this life experience has really, let me see if it will let me. It has really shaped my career trajectory. Before all of this, I worked in accounting. I was great at it. It was a very fulfilling career. But once my husband was injured, I knew that regular work and regular life was probably not going to be a possibility. So I'm so grateful for my work at the Military and Veteran Caregiver Network, which started actually at TAPS. We were incubated under their programs. Let me get started here. So the MVCN is a peer support network. We are delivering the highest quality, best in practice, evidence-based peer support programming to caregivers of all eras, all relationships across all locations. The word peer truly means peer at MVCN. All of us are caregivers ourselves. So there's me, there's Dr. Rachel Moyers, and Melissa Johnson, who is currently going for her master's in social work as well. So the Military and Veteran Caregiver Network was actually launched in 2014 at the White House's Joining Forces Initiative with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. I mentioned that we were incubated at TAPS because of their 20 plus years of experience in the survivor community providing evidence-based best practice peer support. We took that model and changed the scope to caregiving. There is a lot of grief associated with caregiving, and a lot of the models worked very well together. I mentioned that the MVCN serves caregivers of all eras, all stages of life, all relations, and all locations. We also serve veterans themselves that are caregivers. Often veterans come to us and they are caring for their spouse, their aging parent, maybe a special needs child, and they can also benefit from the peer support services provided by MVCN. Our network is so deliberate in everything that we're talking about. It's a network of caregivers, and it's a network of partners, organizations, supporters, just like SAMHSA, that align to support caregivers on their journey. The first of these is our online community. This is a safe, secure, custom technology that operates 24/7 to meet the needs of our caregivers' busy schedules. All of our groups, discussions, topics, and chats are peer moderated. We really pride ourselves on accuracy, especially if you're looking into support programs like those of the VA. The VA is truly leading the way for caregiver support in our country. They have two comprehensive programs. The first is the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, and the second is the General Caregiver Support Services. These are all accessible by going to www.caregiver.va.gov. And there you can see you can apply for caregiver support. You can connect with a local caregiver support coordinator. And they even have a hotline that you can call if you're having a bad day as a caregiver. It is staffed by social workers. And so they can help you with your tough day and maybe help you discover some solutions to challenges you might be facing. I'm going to go ahead and put all that information in the chat or in the question and answer section so you don't have to remember it. But there is a lot of great support coming from the VA as well. This is Abigail, one of our delightful caregivers. And again, not feeling alone is a big theme in what we're trying to do. We also have a peer mentor program, and this is not to take away from the VA caregiver peer mentor program, which Sean, who's speaking later, is both a peer mentor for us and the VA. The only difference with our program is that we have what I call our caregivermatch.com, which is a matching technology that allows caregivers to match with each other on the closest lived experience. So caregivers of the same era, caregivers dealing with the same wounds, illness, injuries, aging, etc., can all be matched with someone who most likely has similar lived experiences. We do train all of our caregiver volunteers, so they are provided the core competencies of caregiver peer support, as well as role-specific training. And here's another great quote from one of our mentors. Support groups. So support groups are actually by far and away our most popular program. We offer these largely online. Unfortunately, COVID has knocked out all of our community-based groups, but we have been able to continue these virtually using the Zoom platform. Caregivers are welcome to join week over week or drop in. You can never be late, and we always encourage you to just come as you are. They are also led by trained caregiver peer facilitators. So I have mentioned that training. This is another caregiver of ours that has appreciated not only the training that we provide to our volunteers, but also the information and education opportunities we bring in from other organizations or other supports. We also have our Hero Care Resource Directory. This is a social care network that has at least 800 resources for every zip code in America. I feel very confident referring caregivers to this resource directory because I know they're always going to find something in their community that can help them, and that all of the resources shared on this directory are checked for their data hygiene, meaning that the links work, the phone numbers work, they're still open, they still have capacity or funding to support the caregivers that might be looking for their support. Also, caregivers are often the ones doing the resource searching for their entire family, and this Hero Care Resource Directory really encompasses the whole family's experience. We have a caregiver calendar, and this is great where caregivers can come to find those peer support groups, like I mentioned, find the education opportunities, our resiliency workshops. Any organization that partners with us is also welcome to share their caregiver-focused events. And then caregivers have a one-stop place where they can go, they can see the date, they can see the registration, or hopefully soon back in person, they can join in-person events. Skills. So we do provide the two-phase training. The first, we use this wonderful Prezi system to deliver the core competencies of caregiver peer support. All caregivers will go through that. It builds on communication skills, understanding crisis points, and the role of peers in crisis, which you should know is to get them to those professionals that can be most helpful. And then we also do a live or Zoom in-person experience where caregivers can practice being a peer mentor with role playing, or practice working in the online community to see how peer support looks like in that environment, or to practice facilitating peer support groups, because those are by far and away the most popular. Here's another great quote from one of our amazing caregivers. And another one here. So we always say that we are working to engage and increase hope and well-being amongst our caregivers, and it's lovely when we can hear that we're actually doing that. This We are going to get to questions if you want to pop those into the Q&A, but here's how you can contact all of us at the Military and Veteran Caregiver Network. We have our website, and if you don't remember anything about my presentation, if you remember redcross.org/caregivers, you'll have access to all the programs and services I just mentioned. The best email to get a hold of us is programs.mvcn@redcross.org. And then, of course, we're on those social medias, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, if you want to follow along there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful and looking forward to the other caregivers speaking behind me.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Your presentation is really a testament to your commitment that you're caregiving at home while also working to help others increase their capacity to be caregivers. And we thank you again. Next up, we have Sean Moore, who's the Executive Director and founder of Caregivers on the Home Front.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending and being here to find more out about caregivers and those of us who are caring for our wounded and ill veterans at home. I am a caregiver to my veteran who spent 23 years in the Army and completed 7 combat tours to Afghanistan. And a little like Melissa, you absolutely more than likely would not be able to tell my husband has any injuries. He has what is called invisible wounds of war, and because of that, has come home with PTSD, high anxiety, major depressive disorder, borderline personality disorder, and suicidality. And COVID, absolutely, we know this, is impacting many of our families, many of our entire population. And veterans had a tendency to isolate before. And after COVID, they really have isolated even more. For our family, we've experienced 6 different crises this last year where my husband has ended up in the hospital. So what I'm going to get to is really, what are the impacts of trauma on the family? We oftentimes hear about what those impacts are for the veteran, but in our communities, when there's support for the veteran, we oftentimes, just like Veterans Day, we thank them for their service, but we don't look past that veteran to the family standing beside them or who are at home 24/7 taking care of our veterans, to thank them for what they do each and every day to keep our loved ones safe, to keep them healthy. Maybe get them to their appointments at the VA, make sure they're taking care of their medication. All of this has a huge impact on our families, and not only the adults of the family, but our children. Next slide. These are some of the objectives which were covered at the beginning, so we can go to the next slide. So the numbers do not lie here. There are approximately 5.5 million Americans caring for our injured or ill service members and veterans. There are over 2 million veteran children who have become secondary caregivers in these homes. Caregivers provide $14 billion of uncompensated care each year. You know, caregiving for a loved one is often demanding and a difficult task, often doubly so for caregivers who are juggling care duties within their family life and work. And the result is often that caregivers pay a price for this devotion. Military caregivers consistently experience worse health outcomes, greater strains in family relationships, and more workplace problems than non-caregivers. And the post 9/11 military caregivers fare much worse in this area. Time spent giving care and helping the care recipient cope with behavioral health problems contribute to a depression in these caregivers, as well as their children. Recently, Dr. Roxana Delgado and her colleagues, did a study that indicates that the interruption of life events, loss of self, and caring for a veteran with mental health conditions, such as what I described in our family, and suicidality are a significant predictor of suicidality in military caregivers. This is often something that we don't hear about. We hear about the high number of veterans dying by suicide every day, but what about the caregivers? In this sample, in this research that she did, there were 458 caregivers. 39% of them experienced interruptions in their education. And this 23.6% reported suicidal ideations since becoming a caregiver, not before, since becoming a caregiver. I'm not sure about you, but that number is staggering. It is staggering. In addition, military caregivers, they face this elevated risk for depression. And the RAND study found that the key aspects of caregiving contribute, again, to depression, including time spent giving care and helping the care recipient cope with behavioral problems. Perhaps of even greater concern here is between 12% of pre-9/11 military caregivers and 33% of post-9/11 military caregivers, they lack healthcare coverage, suggesting that they face added barriers to getting help and mitigating the potentially negative effects of caregiving. The impacts of these families are more pronounced in the post-9/11 military caregivers, largely because of their age. If you think about it, these caregivers are often younger and are going to be caregiving for many, many years. Think about this. Caregivers in their 20s who had a loved one that sustained an injury, either in combat or stateside. Think about how long that they are going to be caregiving for their loved one. These aren't elderly caregivers. These are young caregivers. Next slide. So what do we do about this? Just like Melissa talked about with the Red Cross Military and Veteran Caregiver Network, we definitely need to make a one-stop place to list resources specific to caregivers. I always tell communities, it's really hard to, in a crisis, find these support systems. Oftentimes in communities, where do we go to find support? Maybe our city page on the internet. So why not put resources on there for caregivers, not just veterans? I've seen a lot for veterans, but we really have to make sure that we are targeting our family members and caregivers as veterans as well. Must provide opportunities for caregivers to meet each other, just like in MVCN that Melissa talked about. Caregivers on the Home Front provides these opportunities for caregivers to meet each other. Oftentimes when we are in a depression or we're experiencing these challenges at home, we think we're the only ones going through it. And unless we get involved with other support of caregivers that know what's going on, we think we're all alone, which then brings down our own mental health even worse. So we absolutely must have access to culturally competent mental health care. Caregivers on the Home Front took our support of caregivers a little bit further in that I'm a social worker. We have therapists working for us who are also caregivers. So we've taken this peer support and added one more layer and making sure that we are providing mental health therapy and evidence-based programs for the mental health and wellness of our caregivers, such as a mental health and wellness restorative weekend, where we get together with other caregivers and provide a no-cost weekend solely dedicated to the caregiver's mental health and wellness. They have trauma too. So we do trauma groups. It's a 12-week virtual trauma group that may talk about trauma surrounding their veteran, but oftentimes our caregivers don't get to talk about their own trauma because they're so engrossed in taking care of their wounded or ill veteran. They've got to get a place to take care of their own mental health. Having cultural competent mental health care in our communities, most of the caregivers don't seek or do not qualify to seek care at VAs. Therefore, our communities must be making sure that they are providing culturally competent mental health care. What does that mean? That means you know the military and veteran landscape. You know that there are 5.5 million military and veteran caregivers and what they are experiencing in their own mental health. Caregivers on the home front also provides training to these community-based mental health community providers. We want to make sure that we're also including caregivers and family members in job fairs and higher education opportunities. Many times I see job fairs targeting our veterans. My veteran can't work and he's not alone, but I need to. And I need those job fairs targeting me so I know that I am welcome to come to them. I also need to know that employers understand what caregivers are going through and that we may need to attend the appointments with our veterans. You heard Melissa say how many appointments she's been to with her veteran. We need employers to understand that we may need a flexible work environment. We may need to flex our time and be able to stay at home and work so we are with our veteran. If anything, the pandemic has shown us that we can work from home and be productive. Another thing that you can do is contact your Elizabeth Dole Foundation fellow in your state to be a part. SAMHSA talked about the Mayors and Governors Challenge in the states. If you don't have a caregiver on your team, you most definitely should. You've got to make sure you're representing the caregiver and the family members in everything that you're doing surrounding the veteran. You're not getting the complete story unless you are. Next slide. Melissa mentioned this. We want to make sure that we're training our providers in inclusive care. This is a campaign, a program within the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and the VA, where caregivers are welcomed to be a part of their care team. As much as this is a program for the VA, I have had the opportunity to present the same program to our local community mental health providers, and it has been a huge shift in how we are supporting our military caregivers in their own mental health and recognizing that if you do see a veteran in the community, you absolutely must be asking on the intake form, have you or a loved one ever served? It provides mental health providers with a wealth of information that you are not getting unless you ask that. Our policymakers, we must protect and expand state and local support programs. It isn't just about what our landscape looks like on the national level, because it ends up leaving people out. We've got to expand respite to veteran and military caregivers. The Elizabeth Dole Foundation has a wonderful respite program right now that provides caregivers 35 hours of in-kind respite care for the caregiver to get a break, maybe get help with house cleaning, meal prep. Maybe they need someone to sit with their veteran just so they can get some time away. But our state and our local governments can make sure that they are expanding on this and providing that respite to caregivers that so desperately need it. And remember, I'm not talking about just our elderly caregivers. I am talking about caregivers in their 20s and 30s. Employers, like I said, offer paid family leave. This is a huge thing that we can do for our caregivers, flexible work schedules. Melissa mentioned that it's National Family Caregiver Month. So many of our caregivers get lost in caregiving. Who are you? I am a caregiver, and we need to make sure that our caregivers understand and they're given opportunities to know that caregiving is a role that they play, but caregiving is going to end. So what are we doing to set them up for success in their life when caregiving does end? Next slide. Again, make sure that we're offering support resources for family and caregivers. They don't know what's not out there, right? Or they don't know if they don't know. This is a picture of one of our restorative weekends in Texas just a few weeks ago. And this is towards the end of our restorative weekend. See the smiles on their faces? This is from getting together with other caregivers working on their own mental health and wellness. Melissa also, she mentioned that joining forces and the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is now putting a coalition of hidden helper support together, making sure that our kids in veteran and military homes are getting the support that they need. Just a tidbit, my youngest is 11 years old. About eight weeks ago, this hits home, but you all need to know this. About 8 weeks ago, she went up to our art teacher and told them that she felt like ending her own life. This is how it's affecting our children. And we need to make sure that we are providing resources for our children who are living in our veteran homes where mental health and suicidality is prevalent. Their moms and dads may not be able to get out and see what they're doing at school and their activities. How can we support them? If you don't know, you absolutely must make sure that you are tapping into these resources and providing them where you live so that our caregiving children are seen and heard, and we don't continue this cycle that is happening in our caregiver space. There's some different resources on this page. Again, thank you so much for being here and making sure that you get the resources that not only you need if you're a caregiver, but if you're providing support or you don't quite know where to go yet, tap into these organizations and reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean, for shedding light on the mental health impact of caregiving and discussing how we can all increase community support for caregivers and families. Now I will turn it over to Katie Leroy, who is a family caregiver for U.S. Army veteran Stephen Leroy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. The National Council of Mental Wellbeing, hosting and being here along with SAMHSA, the SMVF TA Center. I really appreciate the amazing women I've had the opportunity to be on the panel with today and hearing all of their stories. And all of you who have stayed with the presentation to kind of hear what we have to say today. A little bit about myself. I have been a teacher my whole life. I love teaching and seeing people grow their skills and passions towards things. I started with teaching swimming and became a certified instructor with Infant Swimming Resource in 2009. And I take little babies that are 6 months old to a year, learn how to hold their breath and roll back and float unassisted until help arrives. Kind of doing that is learning the sensory motor and learning that everybody has a different way of approaching things and how can I help them. And I found that just that basic skill has helped me in my caregiving and the jobs I've done volunteering and supporting and working for injured veterans and caregivers themselves. As mentioned before, I taught scuba diving at Walter Reed and kind of customized each class for each veteran's disability or challenge in the water and stood by their side as they were successful in being able to dive and go under and see a new amazing world. And I loved it. And being a part of that community. There was another program at Walter Reed that was helping veterans in another way with a different sport through cycling. And I also love to cycle. So I was like, hey, I'm here. Let me volunteer. I want to be a part of this joy and helping people explore things. And that is eventually where I met my husband. I did not know him before injury. I met him after injury. So he was there recovering for over 2 years. And his dad was his caregiver initially when he was first there. Like stated before, he is a double leg amputee. He is an above the knee and below the knee amputation, above AK and BK for below, and had a very challenging start to recovery for him. A lot of surgeries failed and he was there for a long time. We were able to meet, and eventually it was just meant to be, and a connection through all of that. And then I kind of stepped into this caregiver role that I wasn't aware of or didn't really understand how big of a role that was going to be. But just like anything else, kind of taking that and moving forward. Next slide. I learned that this new role was going to have many, many hats to wear. And this is just a few of them. And I'm sure some of you wear them in your life too, as a parent and different things. So as a caregiver, medical appointments and surgeries, daily organization and helping even with going to those appointments and making sure we're there on time, because he does have the visible wounds, but he also has invisible wounds too. So that's a really big thing for us and every day. Stepped into the role of coaching, and I didn't know that was gonna be a hard one for me, but it was through his recovery, helping him work towards life goals, and when to help, when not to help is just as important as knowing when to help. Partnering, still dating and having those moments and keeping the relationship up, and it not be all about recovery or the next surgery or things like that have been challenges. And then we became parents. We have a daughter that's 2.5 years old. And that's a whole new challenge of him trying to help in the nighttime and trying to pick her up from the crib, with no legs, and support her head, and then wheel her to me. He figured it out, but it, was adorable. He would hold her in one arm and push his chair with his one arm, and then have to switch and push, but he did it. But those were new challenges and new hats that we were wearing together to figure out, for me to let him do that and not just say, hey, I got it. So it was definitely a different experience. As a motivator, kind of cheering him on, saying he can do it, as said in some of the previous comments, that it's challenging being isolated and different in the community and always having to adapt. So motivating and saying that you can do it and being a part of it. Employee and boss, like just mentioned, it's really hard for me to wear that hat and show up for everyday life, for my family's needs. My husband had a surgery last year this time. He was in the hospital for and at Walter Reed for a month, and then he was just gone for 2 more weeks for revision surgery. And those things are still popping up and happening. He was initially injured in 2012. So it's an ongoing process for all of that. There's other things on here I'm sure we can think of and talk through, with all of the other things, being a daughter, myself, a friend, a mentor, an advocate in the community. We wear a hat of educating about disabilities or the military, so many different hats that we can wear. But it's kind of seeing how to make these transitions easier for you, for your veteran, organizing them and setting the schedule for what is going to work best for you. Early on in our relationship, these hats started to stack up on me really quickly. And I didn't realize it. I kind of laughed earlier when I heard about the coach, because when I met him, he had one of his last surgeries that enabled him to start wearing prosthetics regularly. And he had this goal to walk again and eventually run. So we set out on that path together, and he was doing a great job walking. And then we ran the first 5K. Within like 2 months of him walking, he had a great support system up in DC with other amputees who joined us and encouraged him and helped me learn how to guide him and be next to him. And then we set off on, a 5 mile and a 10K, and we were out training one day for a longer run. And with that advanced organizing and communicating to help him, put things into place, we talked about, let's run a mile, and then we're going to walk a 10th, and let's run a mile. We were in our second mile, and we were about a 10th of a mile away from having this moment that we were going to walk. And he said, I need to stop. I said, oh, can you keep running? We only have a 10th of a mile to go before we stop. And in that moment, he didn't have the words to say, no, I'm in pain. This is a different situation. I don't need you to be a coach. I need you to be a partner. I need help. But in those moments, he wanted to keep running. He wanted it to not hurt and to be successful. So we had this moment where I didn't know what to do, because it was all new. It was a change in attitude. It was a change in helping him. So wearing the coach and the partner hat all at once was a lot. It was a big learning curve. However, we worked through it. We did finish that run. He took his break, and we kind of moved forward from that. But it was hard at first for me, for sure, to do that. So being a caregiver in that place and being a coach and all of these different hats, I have found empathy and the ability to care for the veteran with their social, emotional, physical, or mental needs changes daily and from time to time. Sometimes, the time we ran before, he didn't need the same thing as he needs later, and kind of helping for me, knowing that it's not me as the caregiver in those situations. It's not about me, it's about them. It's about the needs there, and kind of staying focused on the triggers, or being able to identify the change in the mood and different things is different and challenging. So with that said, the next slide, knowing that it's not about you when you're caregiving, what does self-care look like for yourself? Because as mentioned before, as caregivers, we don't take the time to stop and to care for ourselves, and we say we're okay. So a quick list of things that could be great to help you and to help with self-care in everyday life, if you're a caregiver or not. The typical one is spa or beauty treatments, but there's so many other things you can do for yourself. Read something for pleasure. You can read the list here. I love scheduling a phone call with a friend that I haven't been able to talk to in a long time, and just be able to catch up and be me and all of that with them. But it doesn't matter what you choose to do here, or the list could go on, from yoga or biking, or mentioned before, therapy yourself. I have done therapy before, because that caregiving and trying to navigate a new family and keeping on track and what I want for my path, and just taking that time to invest in myself and have that communication is very important, which is great self-care as well. I always think of, in these situations of self-care, because there was a time that I wasn't doing a good job at it, is I took a flight and I was on the airplane, and they had said, if the oxygen masks come down, please put it on yourself first and then assist others. And I think that's kind of a very similar thing with caregivers. If we can take that moment and have a second to have a community, or a moment to call a friend or learn a new skill, and put our own oxygen masks on first, then we can take care of the other ones around us. But like mentioned before, it is challenging in our community to be able to find that moment and to take that moment, and how important it is. So there's been communities and groups that have supported me, like Sean's and different ones, that we've gotten together as a group of, for me, it's a double amputation and above caregivers. And we have this close little group that we can support each other and talk about similar things with prosthetic failures or things like that, and putting those things together. But the key in the end about self-care is not to overload your daily to-do list and to be realistic about what you can accomplish. I know there's a long list of all the things that we want to do, and what we can do is something different, and accepting that. I'm sure some of you are chuckling at the idea of having a realistic to-do list, but it really is a key to success in continuing to maintain the schedule and the requirements of your changing needs of the veteran. I would also say for self-care, with my husband just being gone for surgery for 2 weeks, and I am working and doing all these other things, what's been very helpful for me is to have a list of things that other people can help me with, to help with the challenging part of his recovery or solo parenting. So often there's a lot of people out there that do want to help, but don't know how to help and doesn't know what that looks like. So if I can take a step back and say my needs to people, then it really helps. So, having together a group talk about it with your spouse or other people, everyone has their strengths. When my husband was gone, my child was outgrowing her car seat, but I did not have the bandwidth to research which car seat I need to buy next to put her into, to be safe and all of those things. And I have a really great friend that is an amazing person at researching. And she's like, hey, how are you doing? Do you need anything? And I said, actually, I do. My daughter's about to outgrow her car seat, and I don't have the time to look through the reviews and to find the height and weight that fits her best. And she jumped right in there and sent me a few links and helped that. So know your friend's strengths and family strengths through all that can definitely be helpful in sharing all of that. On here, self-care, plan a new recipe night. I think you can do that together with your partner or alone. I think that self-care of doing it together and experiencing those things together can be a really great experience, and just have fun with everyday life and focusing on all of the joys has been definitely helpful for me in that self-care. Next slide, please. So like spoken about before, the visible and invisible wounds, my husband has both, and there are challenges both physically, mentally, and it's hard to focus on all of the needs that are going on at the time. So for me, remembering that caregiving is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and hanging in there. And how do we keep the positivity and keep from our veterans declining their behaviors and isolating themselves or turning to alcohol, turning to drugs, smoking, so many of the other destructive behaviors that we are working so hard to keep them away from. And for us, doing activity, being active and doing exercise is a way to help us have those goals. If it's running the races or accomplishing some other sport that has helped us. My husband and I, when we were going through that story earlier, where he absolutely needed to stop and thought I was questioning him. Like I said, we finished that run and we continued to run. And in 2016, we ran the Boston Marathon together. It took us nearly 7 hours, but he completed it. And it was an amazing experience as a guide, standing next to him and completely being all about him, his pace, making sure he's drinking, making sure he's eating when he's supposed to. Me and another guide guided him through the race. There's 2 of us that takes to get him through. The water stations are challenging because stepping on cups, he can slip on his running blades. So we walk through them. People want to give him high fives and are so inspired by him, and that can take them down. So kind of saying thank you, but don't touch those things as a caregiver. Now this is that coach role, are really challenging. And it was such a great moment for us. He was able to go ahead and run the next 3 years as well. But about 3 years ago, his skin graft on his leg was starting to fail. and was unable to get in prosthetics. So for us, this is new change of what daily activities and exercise and goals in our life, and that community outside of our house, being able to meet up with other veterans and other people with disabilities at the events, changed for him. So it was really challenging, and I had to pivot on my, what it looked like. And so he was in his wheelchair for 2 years before they had come up with another plan to replace his skin graft on his leg. They took a flap from his shoulder and put it on his leg. And he was in PT for his shoulder, was up there for a long time, and we had to start over again. So the continuous support for caregivers is so needed, because a lot of times there's a lot of support up front with the initial injury and the initial maybe surgery or different things, but over time, sometimes that support goes away because they say, oh, they're done, they're better, they're recovered. But the silent pain that we have as caregivers, or the person who's actually in the pain, it doesn't go away. It's a lifetime, a need. I think, like Sean said, being a caregiver in, early years and knowing that this is the rest of our relationship, all those other things are great, but caregiving is definitely going to be a part of it forever. Being able to pivot and have support is really important. So connecting with the social groups that give you that. With COVID, it has been a challenge for us as well. And some social groups meeting up online and doing calls like this is helpful, and hopefully, be able to get back out in those communities, but kind of encouraging the veteran to stay with it. And the hardest part is asking for help. As a caregiver, it's very hard. And I had to work on that a lot with having a newborn and my husband now being wheelchair bound again. And so many life changes with, COVID and the world shutting down. Asking for help is really, really hard. But doing it definitely helps. So if you are out there and you want to ask a caregiver, what can I do for you? Can I help you? I have found that the people in my life who are like, hey, do you need help? I'm gonna go get you groceries, or can I do one of these 2-3 things for you? And gives me an option to choose from, because when I'm overwhelmed, it's really hard to put together. It takes more energy to put together how they could help me than them helping me. So asking for help, but when asking a caregiver for help, asking them with a menu of selection is definitely helpful. Volunteering in the community has been helpful for us as the veteran and as the caregiver, staying connected and seeing that there's other people who struggle in different ways or needs help in different ways, and pulling together and being able to be thankful for what you have in those moments is a challenging thing to step outside those comfort zones and be a part of the community. But we have found that giving back and being a part of it has helped us tremendously. Next slide. With that said, I wanted to give some resources or other ideas of how caregivers really have all of these responsibilities and tasks, and a grab and go binder. If that's implementing this in your systems or seeing the need for something like this, the binder that I've had to put together and kind of pull the pieces together that has helped me when he fell in his legs and hit himself really hard and we had to go to the hospital. Being able to grab this binder and have all the medical information has been very helpful. So personal information would be something like the veteran's personal information, primary contacts, my information, a power of attorney or will, medical information, insurance, having the family medical history, the doctors, spouses, everything just right there, ready to go with disability insurance and everything that you can just turn it over when you're asked all of these questions. Military information for medical documents, VA documents, the DD-214s, awards, citations, keeping this all in one little area. The other thing I found helpful is insurance and income, having your homeowners or renters insurance from life insurance policies, vehicles. You can have all of your banking accounts kind of there, investments, real estate, property, and debt That kind of goes along with having, your primary residency, what that is, the vehicles, if you have any storage units, private properties, mortgage accounts, passwords, vehicle loans, all of the things, taxes and credit cards, all in one little area. And I have some friends that, expand on this into different areas that help them, but it's a good way to start and hopefully support caregivers and things that they would need. Next slide, please. Here's some resources that are out there for military families and programs that are really great that I wanted to share. The other one that I mentioned with the caregiver group that I'm a part of, where we're double leg amputees and above, is Simplify Fund. They have helped us tremendously. They help all branches of the military, and support from helping with adaptive equipment to helping with the housing and supporting in so very many ways. And I am thankful to be a part of their family and them taking care of me as a caregiver. And with that, I appreciate everyone listening and being here for me.
Katie, thank you so much for sharing. I'll say that the slide with the juggling hats was just a poignant visual of a day in the life of a caregiver. And it was so important to hear about what self-care looks like and to have those tangible examples of how to utilize your support system. And for all of you, Melissa, Sean, and Katie, I know that everyone who's viewing this webinar has benefited in multiple ways from your transparency and dedication to support not only your family members, but also to support your fellow caregivers everywhere. And sincerely thank you. And now I will turn it over to Alexandra Mead from the National Council to take us through some of the questions that we've received.
Great, thank you, Stacy, and thank you again to all of our panelists. It's been such a great, engaging hour together so far, and we're looking forward to tackling some of your questions. So we invite you to please continue to send those in the Q&A, and we will go ahead and get started. And so again, just a reminder to our panel, we invite anybody to jump in to share thoughts on the questions coming in. So we'll get started with a question that asks, for interagency groups working on suicide prevention plans and hoping to incorporate military and veteran caregivers into that conversation, where should teams look to partner in the community to address the needs of caregivers?
I can jump in on that. I think one of the greatest resources that you have for finding caregivers who are advocates in your own state is go to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation's website and look to see what caregiver fellow who is in your state. I happen to be a part of our Merrill's Challenge in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm telling you, you're missing a big piece if you're not including the F on the M of SMVF. You've got to have caregivers on your team, so you're reaching them as well. But the Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellows, great resource. That's what they signed up to do, advocate.
Thank you so much.
I think
any other panelists? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Alexandra, and thank
Sorry.
you, Sean. Such a great point. The Elizabeth Dole Foundation really is doing a lot with their hidden heroes, cities and counties, and that's a great way to tap into local advocates that can help elevate caregiver causes, not just for suicide prevention, but all across, caregiver issues. Another thing I wanted to announce is this Thursday, in conjunction with PsychArmor and the VA, they are launching a SAVE training, which is for providers that are interested in learning how to prevent suicide for caregivers, specifically military and veteran caregivers. I was honored to be asked to help facilitate that video, and it is launching this Thursday along with PsychArmor and the VA. So there is more information, especially for those caregivers that might be struggling with suicidal ideation, and you can really learn how to save a life.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to ask and open it up to the panel. What are your thoughts around what's a common misconception that you see in the conversation around caregivers? And how do we make sure that that stigma continues to be reduced?
Well, I will say that all of the stigma that comes along with mental health conditions also follows their caregivers. Some specifics are post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of misconceptions about what that is and how that presents. Substance use disorder, another challenge for a caregiver, as well as someone who might be struggling with that condition. I think one of the best ways to reduce stigma are to have frank conversations, to have real conversations that engage people, that don't sensationalize it, don't shock people, but really just those safe conversations to talk about the real issues, to share the challenges, and of course, to lean on each other for support and find those resources that are really going to help.
I think one thing that I'd like to add is, sorry, Katie. If I don't live in a military city, so when I first started talking about caregivers, people thought, and then when I started Caregivers on the Home Front, they thought that we were a professional caregiving company. I'm like, no, I've got one veteran to take care of. I'm not here for veterans. I'm actually here for the person standing next to you. So that's a misconception. Our communities don't know, really, unless you're near a military installation or that military state, think Texas, right? People don't understand that there are actually family caregivers taking care of our veterans. And unless you all on this call are taking this information and at least telling one person in your community, one person, and educate them of what our family members are doing behind the scenes, some of us in these communities still are not being seen.
Yeah, and I was going to jump in there with the stigma. For me, there's a lot of times that we'll meet new people or have conversations, and then if my husband rolls away or walks away, the person will then start asking me a whole bunch of questions or say, well, is he really doing okay? Because based on the conversation, they, oh, he looks like he's doing good, but wants that verification from me as the caregiver and different things coming to me. And that's a very awkward position to be in, that, being asked questions you're not comfortable saying in front of the person, then the caregiver is taking on that responsibility from the community. So being aware of that it puts a lot of stress on the caregiver.
So hard to be that buffer, right, Katie?
Thank you all. Any other thoughts on that question before we move on? All right, so next we have a question around what are some strategies to help bring employers into the conversation, to help provide employment opportunities for our caregivers?
Well, I will say that hiring a caregiver is one of the best things you can do. These people know how to critically think. They know how to thrive in dynamic situations. You're never going to find a better employee than someone that's also served as a caregiver. And that's really what the caregiver is bringing to you. Some things an employer can look at, and I'm so grateful. The Red Cross just launched a paid caregiver leave for caregivers. So if you find yourself in a caregiving situation where perhaps you've already exhausted all of your PTO, or you don't have any days saved up for a surgery or a medical step back, that you aren't being kind of punished financially. So that's one way. I think also before Red Cross even had their paid caregiver time off, they had a shared PTO pool, meaning that other Red Crossers could donate their PTO for family caregivers that might be needing some extra time off. And I think that really helps build the community of your coworkers as well, that everyone kind of feels in this together. And if they had, 4 hours extra time, maybe they could donate that to a caregiver so that they could take time off to take their loved one to an appointment or go to the pharmacy, things like that. So I think anytime you're thinking of caregivers, they're just wonderful. I mean, I have someone on our team, and all the caregivers I've ever worked with have been phenomenal employees, really going above and beyond. Their work becomes a respite in a way. They're very, very passionate. They're very committed. And any inkling of support that employer is going to give them in respect to their caregiver journey is going to be returned tenfold. So I really encourage people to look at caregivers for employment, not to think of that as something that might be a hindrance, but rather this is a very, very good employment option, and anything you can do to support them, whether with PTO policies, flexible work hours, working from home, all of that is going to help that caregiver be successful for you.
One of the other ways that we can, we have to educate our employers too. Some just don't know. I am absolutely certain they probably have caregivers in their midst and they don't even know it. But one of the things that we've found here at Caregivers on the Home Front is tapping into the employee resource groups, and many of them have veteran employee resource groups. So if I can make a phone call and call them and then get an opportunity to present to them, then they can take it to their employer and say, hey, did you know? Or in making sure that when they are highlighting the veteran for Veterans Day, what about any of those caregivers? And generally, what we found is they don't know what they don't know. And it's not for lack of not wanting to know. We just need to educate them. So again, everyone on this call, if you're working somewhere that's got an ERG, reach out to us so we can bring that information to your employer.
Thank you. Those are great tips. All right, our next question asks, are there gender differences that you've noticed between male or female caregivers and seeking resources for them based on gender?
I'll go ahead and start with that one, with my husband's dad being the caregiver at first. He was definitely one of the only dads at Walter Reed. There were a lot of moms caregiving, and he was one of the few dads, and then also partners or spouses at that time. So he definitely is part of a smaller community of that. And a lot of the programs that allow the veteran to travel with a caregiver or spouse doesn't usually have gender requirements. They are really good at that. If it's a friend, if it's a dad, or different things like that, I think it is harder it's more surprising and shocking when my father-in-law would say he's the caregiver, because his mom was back home working. She taught school and wasn't able to leave for over a year and not teach, and he had a job that was able to allow him to work from anywhere. So he was provided that opportunity, but it definitely was not the norm in our setting.
I was trying to look up a statistic that is in the Hidden Heroes study done by RAND, and it actually found that there are more male caregivers than female. And I think one of the issues is a lot of males don't necessarily identify with that work, or they're stigmatized by the word caregiver altogether. I will say that at the Red Cross, in our military and veteran caregiver network, we did see, upon the request of our male caregivers, that they wanted more gender specific support, understanding that there's an additional level of stigma, some different cultural implications to being a male caregiver. And so we were able to facilitate a secure online community specifically for male caregivers. We also have a huge number of battle buddy caregivers. This is a veteran taking care of another veteran. And you might see yourself in that sometimes. Maybe someone you served with, you need to take them to medical appointments, or you help their spouse get groceries, or little things that you might do to keep up with someone who might have been impacted by their service and you still have a connection to them. There's a lot of that going on. I think there have been great articles on military.com about male caregivers as well. I think Danny Trejo, the actor, he did a big campaign to kind of highlight that there are male caregivers. But I think we just have to talk about it more. We have to share that this is a real, it impacts all humans, caregiving does. And if you need to find support as a male caregiver, it is available.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question asks, my husband and I are veterans, but I'm not a caregiver for him. Can I be one for other veterans?
Like professionally or as a friend?
I'm not sure. I'm assuming the person was asking if there's any formalized way to get involved and sort of help support. And I'm sure there's probably some informal and perhaps some more streamlined options. But are any of the panelists aware of opportunities folks could get involved if they'd like to?
So I know of a couple. Caregiving is a massive need in our country as a whole. If you're specifically interested in providing care to caregivers in a career type way, there are many agencies that are actually seeking to hire in-home caregivers for our veterans. Other options are like, I love the VA's medical foster home program, and that's where you actually become a trained caregiver and have a veteran with medical needs live in your home, and they become your kind of foster veteran that you take care of. And we've seen great success and beautiful models of that across the country. I do have a link about that I did put in the Q&A, but there are lots of options. And even if you know a caregiver, there's a way you can provide respite. So a lot of times veterans and their caregivers don't always utilize respite, and respite is when someone comes and gives the caregiver a break so they can go do whatever they need to do to kind of reset, maybe get some errands done. Katie talked about the spa days that everyone thinks of, but some people like to, garden or work out or other things that might not be so typical, archery, comic books, all kinds of fun things. Whatever makes you feel good, that's your self-care. And whatever that is, that's how you should engage with respite so that you can have something for yourself. But if you are looking to support veterans and caregivers, and you already have a relationship with that kind of family, offering that respite, hey, I'll come sit with your care recipient while you go do whatever you need, or offering to run errands like, oh, I'm going to the grocery store, what can I grab you? These types of things really make a big difference for the veteran and the caregiver themselves. And if you already have that relationship, it's really easy. It's easy for everyone involved, and it can make you feel really good about helping these families.
Alexandra, I'd also like to mention that the Governor's Challenge has come up a couple of times. So I wanted to make sure that participants are aware of that. VA and SAMHSA have come together to create the Mayor's and Governor's Challenge to support service members, veterans, and their families. The challenge is currently existing in 35 states and 22 communities. And many of the challenge teams have created peer support programs as part of their action plans to support SMVF in their communities. So I would just like to encourage individuals, if you are just looking for ways to support SMVF in your communities, and as Sean said, we really try to make sure that folks remember the F in SMVF. Different community peer support programs are perfect ways to make yourselves available to help the military and veteran neighbors within your communities.
Thank you. That's so important. And we have a question that I suppose we could broaden a little more generally, asking around suggestions and strategies on how to support caregivers overall. There's many people caring for children, of course, and curiosity around, are there supports out there for the whole family? I know a few of you have touched on this. I wonder if you could share a little more around some community support options, just ways to get people involved. So again, just to help reduce that feeling of feeling alone.
Absolutely. So we've heard the term sandwich caregiver, and you might not know what that means. So a sandwich caregiver typically means someone who still has young children at home and is also caring for aging parents. So you're kind of in that sandwich of you have aging parents, but you're still in your child rearing years. Add a spouse or another care recipient in there, it just compounds the challenges and the issues that might come up, the burden. I hate that word, but that's what they call it, associated. The more care recipients you have, it just adds to more and more needs and stress. I always say, because my husband was injured when my son was 3, and trying to balance the needs of a toddler and a severely injured veteran was extremely challenging. I don't know how I would have done it without the support of my parents. I actually had to have them, we had to move in with them for a period of time just to manage everything going on. You will see that very often. The Hidden Helpers that was just launched, they have several initiatives that are looking at supporting that whole family. So grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors, can come together in support of different resources in camp settings. They have great camps like Camp Corral and others that are designed to kind of look at the family as a whole and understand how that system might be best approached and supported. And I strongly support all of those types of initiatives that do include the whole family. And that is to include the littlest child to the grandparents, because a lot of times it is a whole family that's involved in the caregiving. And it's really important that they all get the love and support that they need.
I think Project Sanctuary is another good one that has support for the entire family that can go together. I think in the mental health aspect, so a lot of those programs give that social aspect of care, which is extremely vital and important to make sure that you're around others that are experiencing similar things. If we take it a little bit further into the mental health aspect of making sure that we are providing opportunities for those family members together and individually to get their own therapeutic support. Because I've been to some of those family events, which are, again, so needed, but at the same time, there's probably not some things that I'm going to share around my veteran. Just not going to. For one, I don't want to make him feel worse than he is feeling. And two, I need a safe space, and it may not be a safe space. So making sure that we're providing mental health counseling. Caregivers on the Home Front offers free mental health counseling. And again, Melissa brought this up. There are some great things that are beginning to happen for our children in these caregiving homes. Caregivers on the Home Front has a pilot program that we're going to start with older and younger peers, matching them together. So we have an older child, say 16, 17, 18, providing opportunities for them to get together with someone that may be 11 and providing activities and one-on-one space that they can share things that they've gone through. So be on the lookout for those things, some great things taking place.
Great, wonderful. Well, as we near the top of the hour, I'd like to open it up to our panelists here, and we want to thank you all again for sharing with such bravery and vulnerability and transparency. And as folks as questions have come in, and as we've heard from each of you, I wonder if you each may have some closing takeaways or reflections on what's been shared today and sort of where you are with it now. Anything you'd like to leave people with?
I think it's just so incredibly important. For one, I love that we have seen so many people on this call. That is so inspiring, I believe, to each one of us on the panel. making sure that you are involving the caregiver in any of your support that you are providing in your local level. I always believe that if there is an organization or a local support providing care for a veteran, you can expand that by not much more bandwidth to include the family member. And that is going to go a long way in the mental health and wellness support of that entire veteran family unit, because veterans do not heal in a vacuum. They do not recover in a vacuum. They recover in their family. That's their first community, their family, and then their community that they live in. So please keep that in mind. We need you all.
I'm just so completely inspired by Sean and Katie. They use the term hidden heroes for caregivers. And while I don't necessarily attach that to myself, when I hear Sean and Katie talking about all they've been through and all that they continue to build and support for their fellow caregivers, it's really inspiring. I have to piggyback on what Sean said. And even if you don't have what it takes to add families, caregivers, and even survivors, because that's a part of the journey as well, just considering them, including them, and knowing that oftentimes it is that caregiver that's searching for resources for the entire family, and that children are actually a great gateway to the whole family getting support. So I hear veterans and caregivers say, oh, I don't need any help. I don't need any help. As soon as their child indicates they might need some help or support, usually the whole family will lean in and ensure that child gets what they need. So if you see yourself in those sorts of roles, including the whole family, children especially is important. One of the other things, because this is SAMHSA, and I know we have a lot of amazing mental health providers and supporters here, the Red Cross has an opportunity we have licensed mental health professionals that deliver our resiliency workshops. And these are 90-minute workshops designed to give people real resiliency skills and an opportunity to connect with their peers. So if you're interested in volunteering and learning how you can support caregiver mental health, becoming a Red Cross resiliency volunteer is a wonderful opportunity. And then lastly, I love to say this because oftentimes we're so focused on the veteran and why do we need to worry about all the other people? The RAND report, Hidden Heroes, that Sean shared says that the #1 impact for a veteran's health outcome is a well-supported caregiver. Taking care of that caregiver takes care of the veteran. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone that has been here. You guys, yeah, I'll go ahead and mirror it, have been an amazing panel to speak with, and I am honored to be a part of it. The support from the community and the people around has been the most powerful thing for me, and at the most unexpected times. So when you see the caregiver, and saying thank you, for me along the way, running the 26.2 miles and stopping when my spouse needs to stop and doing all of those things, there has been a few times on the road that someone will stop and touch me on the shoulder or say, thank you for helping him. And that just being acknowledged, because so many people are saying how brave he is, and he is, it's amazing, but just to know that you're a part of it too, and it kind of brings me to my contribution and not even knowing it, obviously. So I appreciate all the support when anyone says thank you for what you do. So keep saying that.
Thank you all so much. It was such an amazing session together today. We want to thank you all very much for your time. We want to thank everyone in attendance today too for being with us on our webinar supporting our military and veteran caregivers. Just a few parting words as we go. Once you leave today's webinar, all attendees will be redirected to a survey on the presentation. It'll pop up in its own window, and we would very much appreciate if you could take a few moments and provide your feedback. A few folks asked about the recording. The recording of today's session and the slides will be available on the National Council for Mental Wellbeing's webinar archives page within 48 hours. And you will receive an email redirecting you with a link to that page. So in case you forget where it'll be located, it'll point you in the right direction. And once again, on behalf of the National Council, Policy Research Associates, and SAMHSA's SMVF TA Center, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.